Hello, and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 37 years. This channel is about multiple sclerosis, but at the same time, I guess I feel kind of odd not commenting on what's going on with Ukraine. But I want to keep it on the subject of multiple sclerosis, and one way to do that, I thought, was to look at what multiple sclerosis is like in Ukraine. It was hard, though, to find information about daily life with multiple sclerosis in Ukraine. But I was able to find a few things. I just want to share those with you now, just to give us a little bit of context. Well, one of the first things that I came across was a page on the European Multiple Sclerosis Platform website on Ukraine. And I put the URL there for you, and as I'll do with all of these. But the one thing that I wanted to share with you from this site is that people living with multiple sclerosis at a national level, in other words, countrywide in Ukraine, there are 22,000 people with multiple sclerosis. Next, I found a site, Multiple Sclerosis in Ukraine, out of the World Life Expectancy website. Very interesting facts on all different sorts of things that you might find worth checking out. But the specific one about Ukraine, here's what they had to say. Multiple sclerosis, according to the latest World Health Organization data published in 2018, multiple sclerosis deaths in Ukraine reached 361, or 0.06% of total deaths. The age-adjusted death rate is 0.63 per 100,000 of population, which makes Ukraine number 26 in the world. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you is that most of the medical community will be quick to point out these days that people don't die of MS, they die with MS. I'm not quite sure how they arrived at these numbers, but either way, I think what we're seeing is it doesn't account for a sizable number of the deaths or a sizable percentage of the deaths that happen, but any death from, with, whatever, with MS, it's more deaths than we really want, right? So that's just to let you know that there are people who live out their lifespans with MS in Ukraine. One of the things that I was surprised to learn is that Ukraine is a destination for stem cell therapy in other countries in Europe. Poland, I know, was one example that I ran across, but others as well. So people in Ukraine and also people in other countries would travel to Ukraine for stem cell therapy. And as it says here, apart from the USA, Ukraine and Russia have become the common destinations for stem cell treatments. In Ukraine alone, there are 4 clinics that specialize in providing this kind of treatment, with one of them having the most extensive clinical experience in embryonic stem cell transplantation in the world. So they do have some pretty cutting-edge things. And I'm not saying necessarily that I agree with stem cell research, or I haven't really looked into it carefully enough, but I did want you to know that Ukraine is a destination for this kind of therapy. There is an organization that arranges trips for people to go to these centers to get stem cell therapy. And then finally, I found this site. I think it must be out of France. It's called Le Lézard, and the article that I looked at was, through this conflict in Ukraine, what happens to persons with disabilities? And this is the IDA's statement on Ukraine. And IDA is an organization I had not heard of before, but it must be a European organization. IDA stands for International Disability Alliance. It sounds like it has a pretty broad reach. But this is part of the statement, which I gave you the URL for, so you can go take a look at the whole thing. But I just quoted this one paragraph. Ukraine, in particular in the eastern areas, has been experiencing a humanitarian emergency since 2014, even before the recent escalation of the situation. Many persons with disabilities experienced challenges accessing humanitarian aid and safety. A 2021 OCHA report estimated that out of the total number of people in need of humanitarian assistance at that time in Ukraine, 13% had a disability. Now, with the escalation of the conflict and Russian troops in the country, all persons with disabilities are facing a high risk of losing their lives and not accessing safe evacuation, shelter, and humanitarian assistance. And I would say that in addition to that, they're probably having a great challenge in continuing with their therapies. It's got to be difficult to access the medicines that they need, the doctors, the medical facilities that they were accustomed to using. And so many of them have probably had to discontinue their therapies, at least for the time being. And that, of course, as we know, can be a bad thing for someone with multiple sclerosis. That is definitely part of the humanitarian crisis that doesn't get a lot of airplay, but I think it's very important for us to keep in mind. I think that from what I've presented here, you can see that there is a sizable community of people with multiple sclerosis in Ukraine. As we know, just having multiple sclerosis is challenging enough. You can imagine what it must be like for people in wartime with multiple sclerosis. I am praying for Ukraine. I'm praying for those who are dealing with multiple sclerosis or any other kind of chronic illness or disability. It's going to be very difficult, extra challenging, in a very hard time right now. It's going to be even harder. I admire the Ukrainian people for their courage. I pray for their safety. I also pray for the Russian soldiers because, as far as I can tell, most of them are boys and didn't even know what they were being sent off to do. I pray for justice, of course, to be done, and for President Putin to come to some kind of an understanding that this is not the right thing to do, and to cease and desist. The rebuilding is going to take a lot of time, but I can see that the Ukrainian people have the will to do it. And just as with all of us, even those of us who have multiple sclerosis, will is a highly important thing to have on our side. Well, that's all I have for you today. Take care. Take a special care. And I'll see you again in my next video.